if giving is a good experience, donors will do more of it, and if it isn't, they'll soon stop. And the kind of crisis that very nearly engulfed us just a few short years ago couldn't possibly have happened if we, instead of focusing on what we can get out of this relationship, we were focusing on the mutual benefit that there is for both donor and cause. It's business as usual now for most fundraising organisations, but the kind of message that I want to get across is that this could happen anywhere. And Professor Adrian Sargent makes that case in the foreword that he has very generously written to my book. But I don't think that's because the idea hasn't got on. I just think that our organisations and many of the individuals in them are just not that good at it. They're not, and often they're not supported and they're not encouraged. So fundraising is too low down the organisational priorities. But I am pointing people, I hope, towards the need to get in balance their attention that they give to their culture rather than just focusing on the strategy. But very often in fundraising organisations, the culture is transparently wrong. And if we had a more welcoming culture, so it's not directly a major plank of it, but simply saying thank you and saying thank you properly. To me, I came into fundraising and worked with organisations who would say to me, oh, we don't send a thank you to donations less than £10 because it's just not worth doing. And thanking really is an administrative chore that we would rather not do. We know now it's the best fundraising opportunity of them all.
We have a signed copy of Relationship Fundraising giveaway. It will not only be signed, it will also be personalised to you. But we want the best answer to the question, what is the most interesting thing that you can do?
Hello, and today we come to you from deepest, darkest Suffolk. Don't tell us that we don't travel to try and get you the greatest fundraising advice and stories we can. And we've come here to meet a very special guest, but before that, I'd like to introduce you to my co-conspirator, Giles.
Hello.
Pegram.
As ever.
But as a special surprise for you, we are here today with possibly the godfather of fundraising, Mr. Ken Burnett. Hello, Ken.
Hello Mark, hello Giles. Lovely to see you both and welcome to sunny Suffolk.
And it is sunny at the moment, a bit miserable on the way up. Now Ken, there's a question that I've always wanted to ask you.
Right.
Okay? You've just published, I think, the third edition of Relationship Fundraising. It's been in constant publication for 32 years?
32 years, yeah.
32 years.
Yes, yeah.
Which begs the question, Ken, why are you such a bloody failure?
Well, it's a very good point, Mark, and I'm quite glad that you and I hope Giles both recognise it, because I hear lots of people going on and saying very nice things about relationship fundraising and how much it's influenced them in their career, which I love, and of course that's why I wrote it, and I wrote it for each and every one of those individuals. But as you quite rightly point out, the main basic aim of that book, all of its 32 years, has not yet been realised, and I think that is a tragedy. And so I'm hoping with this third edition that I can move some way towards rectifying it. I think we came quite close to getting the attitude from fundraisers that I would like to see being translated into the donor experience. I'm absolutely wedded to the donor experience, which was a phrase that I didn't use in either the first edition or the second edition, but to me now it seems absolutely crucial. And we developed from when Giles and I started the Commission on the Donor Experience, and you worked on that, and in fact hundreds, even a couple of thousand people worked on defining the right way forward. And one of the phrases we came up with to try and avoid a recurrence of the catastrophe that hit UK fundraising in 2015 was, if giving is a good experience, donors will do more of it, and if it isn't, they'll soon stop. And I think that is, I mean, it's the blindingly obvious, it's almost banal in its simplicity, but if we could just live by that in our communications and our relationship development initiatives, then I think we'd all be much more successful as fundraisers, and I think people would feel much better about being approached by fundraisers, and the kind of crisis that very nearly engulfed us just a few short years ago couldn't possibly have happened if we, instead of focusing on what we can get out of this relationship, we were focusing on the mutual benefit that there is for both donor and cause.
I'm going to interrupt there.
Oh, go on.
You said the crisis that, and I quote, very nearly engulfed us. Very nearly engulfed us?
Oh, it didn't engulf us, we survived.
Did we?
Well, I did.
But by how much? But by that much, or by the skin of our teeth?
I think pretty much by the skin of our teeth, Giles. As you know, we together we agitated with the leading bodies, the professional central organisations that supposedly support fundraisers, and we couldn't get a coordinated response to the crisis that was undeniably affecting fundraisers across the land and affecting donors too, and that had very serious consequences for the sector. But we did get a response. We had the largest number of volunteers came together to redefine best practices in 28 areas of fundraising, as I remember it, and we came up with a document called the 6 Ps, which was intended to be a blueprint for the future direction of fundraising. And my anxiety, and the reason that in this 3rd edition of Relationship Fundraising,
available
from all good bookstores.
Well, actually, it's quite tough.
Actually, it's quite hard to get.
Yeah.
Well, that's because there's been such high demand,
of course.
and the printers are working overtime to deliver it. But I've added about a third of new content to this book, about 50% as much as the previous edition, and I've ended with a call to action, and the call to action focuses on the work of the Commission and the donor experience and the 6 Ps document, because I fear that most fundraisers working in Britain today have not read it. It's a short document. It was intended to be just 8 pages, and it was probably one of the hardest writing jobs I've ever been given, to define and distill the wisdom that came out of that exercise, and its impact on the future of fundraising should be very profound. Now, the fact is the media's attention has moved on, and they're no longer focusing on fundraising. The hemorrhaging of talent from the fundraising sector has, I hope, has slowed, not to anything like I would like to see it, but it's business as usual now for most fundraising organisations. But the kind of message that I want to get across is that this could happen anywhere, and Professor Adrian Sargent makes that case in the foreword that he has very generously written to my book, and I hope that people will pay attention to this potential danger, because I do think that fundraising is a very varied and challenging, and at times can be a very difficult job, but it can be, in my view, one of the best careers going, and we need to get the public to have a somewhat better image of fundraising now.
I realise I interrupted you, but I'm going to ask one follow-up question to that and then hand back to you. So I'm assuming, from what you've just said about the way the sector responded to the crisis of 2015, let me read from you. So deeply ingrained is the short-term, target-driven culture across fundraising in the UK that significant numbers of practicing fundraisers, their leaders and their agents will struggle to genuinely understand fundraising. May I assume, therefore, given what you've said, that has now stopped, that short-termism has now gone, that people have realised the mistakes of that short-termism, that short-termism caused the crisis and have now become more long-term and thinking more long-term?
No,
can I assume that?
No, you can't assume that. It has not, the short-term thinking has not gone away. The short-term thinking did not come into evidence in 2015 with the death of Olive Cook. It was actually one of the main reasons that the first edition of Relationship Fundraising came into being. I started off wanting to do a how-to book on fundraising. There was no good book around at the time in Britain. There were a number of books in America, but not mainly relevant to the British experience. So I set out to produce a how-to book, and in the process of putting that together, I realised that there were a number of things that were going wrong in fundraising that I had seen through my experience as a hands-on fundraising director. I was the director of fundraising and fundraising leader, and had been for about 10 years working in the field. And the short-term thinking, the fact that we were focusing on the money rather than on the people sending it, these were major motivations for me, and in fact there's a long list of changes that the donor-based approach to the business of raising money, which is the subtitle of in fact all 3 editions of this book, that donor-based approach fundamentally changes everything. And I think it was that my experience, and I think the experience of a lot of other fundraising professionals at the time in the early 90s, we felt that fundraising was focused too much on the money and not nearly enough on the people that were sending it.
Mark, I'm sorry, I interrupted you a long time ago.
No, there are a couple of different points, but just taking on that one, obviously looking at where we are now, my perception is often it's not down to the money. It's
well, okay. Let's get something out which I think needs to be addressed, and that is the way we describe our business, fundraising. It's all about money. I don't believe that is the case. I think we are campaigning for change, and people never give us money for things to stay the same. They only give us money because they want to affect some kind of change. And by separating the campaigning element of our work from fundraising, we have allowed people to believe that these people just want money, and they just want more money. And actually the culture of fundraising in the late 80s and 90s was very much that. It was the paradigm was you give and we take. And I don't believe that fundraisers will prosper until they realise that it has to be a win-win situation. We have to give donors as much in terms of fulfilment and meaning and purpose and satisfaction and achievement as they give us in terms of their disposable financial resources. And giving is always voluntary. So there was never any justification for pressure or persuasion. We are, I believe, in the inspiration business, and it's our role to make sure that our donors see the potential in what our organisations are trying to achieve. I think there's we have that. That means communication is at the heart of fundraising, and it's not just about 17 asks and one single direct mail appeal letter. That's not how you build a relationship of trust and confidence. And trust and confidence lies at the heart of fundraising.
Because if we look at the key point, the key question I asked at the beginning about failure, about the failure of relationship fundraising, is why, in spite of the books, in spite of what we see in so many webinars and what we see in so many conferences and so many papers that are published, that the whole idea of building a relationship just hasn't caught on. Both Giles and I do mystery shopping, and the whole sort of like onboarding process, the thanking process, the engagement process is often absolutely shocking. If you might get an email, and then if you give again in 3 or 4 months' time, you'll get exactly the same worded email. No sense about how your money's been used, no sense that you're appreciated as an individual. And that, to both of us, seems the norm in the sector.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree, but I don't think that's because the idea hasn't caught on. I just think that our organisations and many of the individuals in them are just not that good at it. They're not, and often they're not supported and they're not encouraged. So fundraising is too low down the organisational priorities. And just a slight diversion, if I may. I've worked with hundreds of fundraising organisations, as you both have too, and I'm always amazed at the thoroughness with which every fundraising organisation addresses its strategy and the work that goes into that, and the care and the attention. But strategy is about how we get what we want. I wish our organisations focused as much on their individual organisational culture, because culture, as Peter Drucker says, eats strategy for breakfast, and culture is about who we are and what we believe in and what we stand for and what we can do. And we don't focus on our culture, which is a hugely complex subject, and I've partly addressed it in this new edition of Relationship Fundraising, but I was conscious of the fact that there's a limit to, but I am pointing people, I hope, towards the need to get in balance their attention that they give to their culture, rather than just focusing on the strategy.
And so if I could just ask you that one, so what do you think are the cultural weaknesses then that infect our sector?
Well, I think there are quite a few. I think short-term thinking, which bedevils our sector. We're looking at today's results and we're not thinking long-term, and yet for donors, but the long-term prize of a very good, effective relationship will be that the supporter will leave you a legacy at the end of that relationship. But what we don't want people to just give us a single gift and go away. We have terrible problems with retention of donors. We have terrible problems with retention of fundraisers, but that's another issue. I think we have, there's a weakness of leadership, not necessarily directly the fault of the individual fundraising leaders. And I have to qualify this, there are exceptional fundraising leaders.
Absolutely.
We know them, we've worked with them, and we admire so many. But they're the exception rather than the rule in our sector. And very often you hear from fundraising leaders that they're not given equal weighting at the senior management table, that they're not given the support of their chief executive or of their board of trustees. We have this strange and often beneficial sort of double board system within our organisations, where you have the senior management team who run the business and the the governors, the board of trustees. That should be a great advantage for us, but it also has potential flaws, and we've all sat through far too many board sagas where it's been clear that the people on the board don't really get fundraising and don't understand it. So we need to change that, because as a byproduct of that is inadequate investment, which has bedeviled our sector and continues to bedevil it, and inconsistent and inappropriate training, particularly for people coming in. One of the things I've focused on in the new book is your first few weeks as a fundraiser. And this is something that the Sophie Foundation is putting a light on, and we're trying to compile a definitive statement as to the kind of things that should happen within those first few weeks, and also the ongoing support that fundraisers should be able, because I think if we can inspire and keep our fundraisers, then we'll inspire and keep our donors. I think those two things are very highly connected.
Can I come back on one point on that then? Why is it that it's often the largest organisations with the budgets, with the big teams, that are seeing an ongoing decline in income? Because it's often the smaller organisations that are doing well. Like I could compare MSF, which has done brilliantly over the last 20 years, compared to an organisation like Oxfam, for example, which has seen a decline outside of the scandals that they've that have beset them. You know, because surely these large organisations do have the resources, they have the history, they have the data, they have access to many of the best fundraisers. Why are they struggling?
Well, I think, donors don't necessarily like big organisation. They don't like big administration. They want a nippy little Nissan Micra rather than a big guzzling Chevrolet, to quote my old pal George Smith. I don't have a comprehensive answer to that, but I think it is often more difficult for the bigger organisation to focus on its culture. And culture is like, it's like personality, it's like character. So often you might even not be aware of the things that are in your culture. But very often in fundraising organisations, the culture is transparently wrong. And if we had a more welcoming culture, it's not directly a major plank of it, but simply saying thank you and saying thank you properly. To me, I came into fundraising and worked with organisations who would say to me, oh, we don't send a thank you to donations less than £10 because it's just not worth doing. And thanking really is an administrative chore that we would rather not do. We know now it's the best fundraising opportunity of them all, and Lisa Sargent is just about to bring out a book called Thankology. So we have our own ology, and that's a science, my goodness. And as I've written the foreword for it, I know it's a really good book. So
everybody talks about thanking. But people don't
they're bad at
it well.
I think that's a microcosm of the problem that you're wondering about. We all know, we've known for some years, I didn't actually put a great deal of emphasis on thank you in the first edition of Relationship Fundraising. I did do a lot more in the second, and I did even more in my book, The Zen of Fundraising, which was 2006. Everybody nods in agreement when I tell them they should write brilliant thank you letters, but you're right, they don't happen. They do happen. Some of them, and they are great.
We said there are exceptions to all the things we're talking about.
Yeah.
But I gave a donation to an organisation, a big organisation, last October. The first message I got back was thank you for your continued support. I thought, well, it's not continued support.
I've had that too.
And then the thank you was from the Save the Giraffe team.
Yeah.
And I've never thanked by an individual, and the Save the Giraffe team doesn't thank you. And then just by the way, the next 3 emails I got were from the online trading team. So I've never felt thanked by that organisation. Never.
Yeah. Well, I have the same with regular monthly, being a regular donor, and you persistently get appeals as if you were a new supporter, as if, occasionally they'll recognise that you have contributed, but not that you're contributing on any ongoing basis. This is insanity. So there were two things I put into the Relationship Fundraising first edition in 1992. Monthly giving, because I'd been working to build Action Aid and I'd seen the power and potential of monthly giving firsthand. And legacies. I remember being commissioned by one of our very top leading charities in the international development field, who said, overseas aid organisations don't get legacies, and a few short years later there were 24% of their income was coming from legacies. I think at times you have to say, we perpetually, constantly need to revisit the basics. So there's a part in this book called the 34 Foundations of Fundraising, which the original version of that came from my guru and guiding light, Harold Sumption, who's sadly no longer with us, but I've expanded it, and in fact it's on Sophie. It's available 24/7 for anybody who wants it, but it's very clear that most fundraisers don't access these things or are not reminded of them, or think, I've been in this job for 2 years, I don't need to be revisiting the basic foundations of fundraising. Why would I want to do that? And they're not getting the incentive and the encouragement from their leaders, and we should be fighting to change that. So, I think you're right. I am a failure. I have made a career out of constantly trying to reinvent fundraising. I've spent, I think I've written about 8 books on the subject, and it still needs reinventing. Actually, I happen to love the notion of reinventing fundraising. I've seen how much potential we can achieve when we get it right, and there is constantly so many areas and aspects of fundraising that benefit from a rethink and doing things just a little bit differently. The beginning of success is to be different. The beginning of failure is to be the same. Why do people follow all those formulae? But dear friend, can I just sound off a little bit about dear friend? Yeah. This is ubiquitous in our sector, the dear friend letter. What kind of a friend can't be bothered to use my first name, to write to me by name? It's insane. Now, you could probably do a structured results analysis if only people did those nowadays and kept proper records of what the results they're achieving. Wouldn't that be great? And you could probably say, well, actually, a dear friend letter gets as much of a response as one that's personalised, and personalisation involves taking the trouble, but
for the first mailing,
absolutely.
But what about the second?
Wait a minute. We're not talking about immediate ROI. Even I mean, we should know those things. Of course, we should. We should monitor things very carefully. But and the other thing was the business of this major shift in emphasis that I mentioned earlier, that when I started writing Relationship Fundraising, we were focusing on acquisition and exploitation. And, I wrote in Relationship Fundraising that we should be remunerating, or we should be evaluating our fundraisers every bit as much for their retention skills as for their acquisition skills. And that was kind of like a dream in those days. And I have to say that, and I spell it out, and that's what we should be doing in 1992 and in the 2002 edition and in the 2024 edition. But we don't actually routinely measure people for their retention skills. We don't record that. That dream has not happened. And people will be able to tell you the ROI that they get on acquisition, or hopefully they will, not all of them, but hopefully they will. But we should be focusing much more on keeping our supporters. They cost so much to acquire. And famously, it costs a lot less to keep supporters than it costs to acquire them. But we don't look at retention nearly enough. Now, Roger Craver wrote a very good book called Retention Fundraising. But I'm told people don't read books nowadays because they don't have the attention span. Well, we shouldn't be employing people who don't have a sufficient attention span. I have written a very big book, and I know lots of people will criticise this fact. And it has other uses, as you know. You can hold your tripod, it can prop it up, or it can hold the door open, or it's good for weighing down a body.
But if I could come back
to dispose of one,
because the second point that I was going to make, in my opening about being a failure is, in fact, you're not a failure.
Oh, thanks, Mark.
Oh, you're very welcome.
I was just about to go and end it all.
Because at Blue Frog, we do apply, the tenets of relationship fundraising, and it's fantastic. You asked me earlier on how business is. My business, I've got clients doing all manner of different things, but the results have been fabulous. They've been fabulous because what we've done is, from the moment we've recruited a donor, we've engaged them. We incorporate, incredibly well designed, incredibly well thought through newsletters, for example. Thanking, and we're trying at the moment. The key point that I'm trying to push out to the sector at the moment is something that I'm defining as dynamic thanking, making your thanking responsive to the donor at that point that they've given to you. And I've presented to a large number of organisations. I've only had 2 of them actually buy it and say, okay, we want to do this now, and start running it, even in the face of the most fantastic evidence, which relates very much to some testing we did at Sense. Because and what they say to us is, we want to go in a different creative direction, or we've got other routes we want to explore, we want to innovate. And time after time, what I see is those approaches of going down new creative routes or innovating just exploding in people's faces. I was with a client a short while ago who I know has invested tens of thousands, maybe over 100,000 in innovating a new product. And we were talking to doing them about a very small area of work, and it was principally involved in mid-value and how we can bring more mid-value donors on board. And they said quite legitimately to me, we have to be very risk adverse now. We lost money, is what they're in effect saying, on an innovation, to the point where they're now very frightened about, well, not very, but they're now concerned about how much that they can actually invest in another idea, which there's lots of evidence to prove that it will work. And it's I'm almost at the point now where I don't know how to tackle.
Well, I would hope that experience would encourage them to at least go back to the basics and make sure that they were doing those things absolutely
most properly. Of their program is fine. It was just
Can I tell you a little anecdote about
we like
relationship fundraising and the failure aspect? I've been banging on for years about Botton Village and the wonderful case history that they have provided for me. Going back to 1983, I think it was. I had a Christmas card from my client who's left the village many years ago, but we keep in touch. And he said to me, I haven't got accurate figures, but I've been totting up the annual reports from over the 32 years that since we started fundraising together, because it was, no, but not 32 years, it's now nearly 40 years. And he said, our legacy income alone from this thing that we started is over £100 million and probably nearer £180 million. Wow. So I'm not exactly sure. And I said, I don't care.
I'll take whatever.
I'll take whatever. But, now that's an organisation that has done it right and conscientiously. And one of the things that they didn't have was that ego to be doing something new and to be innovating. And because the second question that people say when they say, how can you innovate for me, is yes, how can you innovate and how can you prove that your innovation will work before we give the budget to go ahead? Well, those two things are mutually impossible, contradictory. So, it's there. We need to find a way to make sure that people, when they come into fundraising, we now attract real talent, salaries and conditions, and making our culture of a great place to work. Are attracting more people into fundraising. I make the case for this being one of the best careers going. You can really make a difference as a fundraiser. I just wish we had a better word than fundraiser, because that focuses on only one part of it.
Didn't you create one a few years ago?
I call them campaigning fundraisers. Okay. Yeah, I did, and I've written a book about campaigning fundraising, and lots of people like that, and they think, but we're kind of stuck with. It's rather like not for profit. I don't like that's not what we're about. We're about for a change.
But is campaigning fundraising an excuse for not fundraising, for not raising money? Oh, we campaign instead. Let me. The thing I get told all the time is fundraising is becoming more difficult. I get that told all the time. And there are only two possible reasons for that, in logic. One is that since biblical times, since I started 50, 60 years ago, suddenly people have become less generous. They become less philanthropic. That's one reason. The other reason is that fundraisers have become less good at building relationships with the people who give the money. Fundraising has become more difficult.
It's always been. I mean, I remember right at the beginning of my career being told fundraising is a lot more difficult now, and I started with targets that I was doomed to fail and doomed to miss. So we did go out and we did innovate and we did some things differently, but we didn't innovate in a vacuum. So we knew that when we innovated that they were going to work.
But actually, at that point, absolutely stratospheric growth rates.
Yeah,
absolutely amazing.
Yeah, because we were brilliant at it.
Yeah, but you were everything.
That was when I was a success, Mark.
Cool. I was a success as well those days. But at that point, I had 2 years at ActionAid. Chris Rolls, and you know Chris.
I know Chris. Yes, of course.
He taught me, and he was my direct link to you, or George, or Harold, showing me what works. And I could still remember some of my stupid ideas that I said to Chris, and he would just laugh at me and say, "No, we'll just carry on as we are, thank you." But that was the key point, and I think what you had at ActionAid was because you had child sponsors and they were getting feedback at least twice a year on their child sponsor at that point. Plus they were getting the newsletter, ActionAid News, which then became Common Cause. I think it's now Action Magazine. There was so much stuff beyond, here's another reason to give, here's another reason to give. There was the bulk of the comms were about why you were so important and why what you are doing is changing the world. Not just for somebody in the developing world, but changing the structure of the world as well, in terms of understanding about poverty and why poverty exists and how poverty can actually be tackled. Because I think we need to engage people to actually get them to understand the reality of why we have things like, still have global injustice.
Yeah, but that's a communication task. And the most important skills that fundraisers can bring are their communication skills. Yet very few organisations even understand what the right kind of communication skill set would look like. They don't have it in themselves. They haven't been through that school. I mean, you can still become a fundraiser with absolutely no requirement to know anything. That's wrong, and that's why the focusing on the first few weeks of a fundraiser and making sure that there's a clear understanding of what if we are genuinely the inspiration business, people don't buy our products because they have to have them. They buy them because they want them. Actually, that brings me to something else that I've been focusing on in this new. I'm sorry if I keep giving the impression that I'm trying to sell a few remaining copies that there are of my.
Well, there's only about half a dozen left.
I know. But
so people are going to have to get in quickly if they want them.
Giving is good for you. Giving is good for business, but for the ordinary. I mean, well, we've always said, because somebody in Smee and Ford a long time ago worked out that people who leave a charitable legacy live longer, and we kind of equated that to, well, obviously wealthier people live longer than not so wealthy people, and we kind of dismissed it. But actually there's research coming out, particularly out of the USA, and a remarkable woman in the Massachusetts Institute of Technology who's been doing a huge amount of work on mindfulness for senior executives, and the conclusions that this is coming to is very clearly that mindful giving has to be a part of that package. And if you log on to our own National Health Service website, you'll see they in terms of keeping yourself healthy, they recommend 5 things, and one of those is giving.
Time or money, I assume.
I've always said giving time is just as important as giving money. I, in my career, have focused on the financial side of that equation, but anybody can give time to the and being a volunteer is a fantastic thing. I don't know very much about it.
But I want to come back to the question that you didn't really answer. I think that I kept being told, I give my time, not my money, as if the two were mutually exclusive. So I want to come back to my thing about fundraising is becoming more difficult, because what you said was, that's been happening through history. You were told that fundraising is more difficult. I think what you're saying is that donors are not less generous now, or if you are, then you need to tell me. If donors are not less generous now, then why is fundraising becoming more difficult? Surely it can only be because fundraisers are being less good at building a relationship to get the money, or that people are doing something else instead, or that fundraisers are focusing more on innovation because fundraising is becoming more difficult. We then need to get more on innovation, more on risk, rather than something which you said, which is focusing on the basics.
Focusing on what you do well.
So I want to get to why is fundraising becoming more difficult?
I don't believe it is getting more difficult. I believe it is difficult. Fundraising is a complex activity. I think it's a great activity. I think it's wonderful what you can do as a fundraiser. It should be, we should be able to choose from the best of talent, because every time I meet students, they all want to change the world. They all want to make a difference. It was always difficult, and always people have got very good reasons for saying no to you, and then along comes the Ukraine emergency. I was 7 years on the board of the Disasters Emergency Committee, fantastic 7 years with a wonderful leadership team, Salah Saeed and his colleagues at DEC. I really enjoyed that, and it was great. It gave me an experience of fundraising that, although I'd been doing it for over 30 years, I was actually rattling tins, at Bond Street Station for Syrian refugees, and I tell that story. And it's absolutely fantastic. But people have always got a good reason to not give, and we should accept that. We shouldn't be, it's the donor's choice, and we should give the donor choices. But there's so much that we can. I think we're underachieving as a sector generally. I think some organisations are doing it very well and are reaping rewards, and because it's a long-term business, people who've been doing relationship fundraising for the last 10 years are probably only just coming in to see the real benefits of what they're doing. Somebody's been doing it for a very long time, like Camp Hill Village Trust. They can point to the bank balance that shows that it really, really does work. I've more recently been working with the National Youth Orchestra, and they've recruited from scratch, from absolutely no donors to many thousand donors, and they're doing and the correspondence they get from their supporters is fantastic, absolutely beautiful.
Forgive me for pushing, Ken, but
Do
I
push,
really am
Jan.
trying to get to an answer. Why are we underachieving as a sector? I'm trying to get to some
Well, I think
specific
because, as Mark said right at the very beginning, the message that, and it's not just me, but it's you guys certainly, we know how being donor focused works, and that it works, and we can point to it. But it's, we've failed to get that message across. I failed. I think we collectively have failed, because we've been going to seminars and we've been, writing articles and blogs and things like that, and we haven't actually got there. So the job is not fully done, and that's why I did a third edition. The job is not fully done.
Well, from what you said, the job isn't done at all. Okay, it's not fully done by that. But what do we do about it? Is the only thing to do about it to go out and buy your book, or are there other things the sector should be doing?
No, well, I think we came very close in the response that we eventually initiated to the crisis, which you called the collapse of fundraising in the UK. We produced a very credible response on a shoestring, led by volunteers. The biggest volunteer defence of fundraising that I think there's ever been in any developed fundraising market. Yep. Now, I would like, and I make a plea at the end of my book, that we revisit that, and that one thing we wanted was individual organisations to make their own pledge. I think we need a new covenant with donors. We need something that has the power of the rule of law, that we can, we can actually hold people accountable to, rather than all this vagueness that's around. And you can get away with all sorts of things, and many people did. And we had the unedifying spectacle of chief executives of leading charities being summoned to report to Parliament and saying, if we'd known what was going on, then we would never have tolerated it, and those people have been fired now. And
those agencies.
Yes, the agencies. Blame the agency.
Blame the agency.
That was the lowest point, I think, for our whole sector, because if you didn't know that was happening, you should be fired, and if you knew it was happening, you should have been fired. The buck stops at the top.
And at that point, some of those organisations at that point, you could go online and you could listen to every single one of those phone calls if you wanted.
Yes,
they were all recorded.
It's all there. Yeah. And some organisations do have that rigour, but most don't.
And some still do. And those organisations that you go into work with, and they are strict, they are focused. In many ways, that for me is we talk about red flags. That's the best green flag that I can see. When someone is really focusing on how we can get the most return from an activity. Not always expenditures, because some of those things are very, very simple. But looking at how we can turn those around, that's fantastic to me. But it's pretty rare. It's pretty rare at the moment. And I'll be speaking to maybe two organisations, a couple of organisations a week. I'll be speaking to, talking about how we approach and what the work is. And often it's simply, okay, we've got the information required from you, and we're now going to move on and do something else. But often I'm giving them the wrong information, sadly. Not on purpose. There's my camera.
Is that? Oh, sorry.
No, I was just going to. I mean, sometimes it's the really simple things that I think we have that we turn people off. Marketing. Now, I mean, I like you. I ran a marketing company. Marketing was in our stationery. I've never met a donor who wants to be marketed at, particularly not by a charity.
Yeah.
And so promotion rather than marketing. But how many directors of marketing do we have who write to people to say, whatever, and sign their letters, the director of marketing, and donors look at that and they think, I don't know, that's not why I'm helping Syrian refugees or Ukrainian fighters. It's just not on. So I think simple things like that. I mean, it was an edifying experience after 30 years to revisit the original text and find out how much of what I had said back then still had resonance. Can I tell you about the post-it note story? So, I mean, I was amazed when Relationship Fundraising first came out, because as I said in the first edition, all I wanted was 50 people to buy the book, and those 50 people I felt would be clients of my company. That was it. But one of the first things that happened was that I got the biggest order, 250 copies of the book, shipped to Australia by a marvellous woman called Rosemary Wilcox in the Fundraising Institute of Australia. And then in '94, I think it was, I was invited by the Public Broadcasting Service in the United States to give a keynote speech to their people. And I actually did mystery shopping on the PBS stations, and it was a fantastic experience. I absolutely loved it. But I was introduced by a guy called Jim Lewis, who leapt onto the stage, and he had in his hands a copy of Relationship Fundraising, and this is it, bristling with post-it notes. And so and I was amazed when I saw that, and he was saying this is the office copy, and it's been so well used it's passed around. I remember being very upset because I thought, well, they at least should buy their own individual copy. But no, this was the office copy, and then I thought, what I'm going to do with the third edition is I'm going to fill it with with things that you can. And it was so easy. Yeah. There are so many basically quite simple things that will fit on a post-it note that fundraisers should be doing.
We're coming to the end of our hour.
I can't believe it.
I know.
I haven't begun to talk to you about all the things.
I want to. We didn't actually rehearse this beforehand. We have a competition.
We haven't rehearsed anything beforehand, have we? I wasn't there, but never mind. Okay.
We should have rehearsed this, because you have no idea what I'm going to say.
No, I have no idea.
We've got a competition. We have a signed copy of Relationship Fundraising to give away. It will not only be signed, it will also be personalised to you. But we want the best answer to the question, what is the most interesting thing that you can do with 2 P's?
2 P's?
2 P's. What is it?
Go on.
And people can interpret that as they wish.
Can I give my answer?
No, you can't. You send it in, please, to Mark or me by email. We will judge the best answer, and you will get a signed and personalised copy of Relationship Fundraising Edition 3. That is all I'm going to say. I can pass over to you now.
So I hadn't even realised that myself. So Giles's question is, what is the most interesting thing you can do with 2 P's? Now I think that gives you some scope to define P in your own way. You've obviously got the book. You've obviously got the 6 P's, which comes from the donor experience. If you wanted to write in, so you can write in to me at hello@bluefroglondon.com, or Giles at gilespegram.com, or alternatively, if you're on LinkedIn, why not write it in the comment section below, or if you're on YouTube, add it in the comment section below. We'll put all of those things into a hat, and we will pull out well, we won't pull them out because we can actually assess them. So we won't put them into a hat. We'll assess which ones we think are best, and that one will receive a special signed edition from Ken with a personal message.
So you're going to close, but before you do, I just want to thank you, Ken.
It's my pleasure,
that was
Giles.
a fantastic hour. Thank you for
Listen,
thank you for allowing us. You'll do more talking. Thank you for allowing us into your home, for allowing us to come up to this, and for the fantastic lunch you gave us, and thank you for an hour of your wisdom.
It's been a pleasure. My favourite subject, and two of my favourite people.
And
so there we go.
in closing, if there was one thing that you would leave us with, that you would say to our many tens of viewers, what would that be?
It's time we developed a decent commitment to deliver donors a better experience. I firmly believe that if we can do that, just knowing that a good donor experience is essential is not enough. We have to have a very clear, it's got to be stuck on every wall in every fundraising office in every part of the land and across the world. Something that says, dear donor, this is what you can expect from us. And it would have in there the key ingredients, such as honesty and integrity and the certainty that you can trust and be confident that we will do certain things in certain ways, and that it will be a pleasure for you. And if we can do that, I think people will flock to us. We've got the best stories in the world to tell, and we've got the best of reasons for telling them with power and passion that will move people to action. Let's do it.
There used to be a thing called the Fundraiser's Promise. I'm going to dig that out.
It's Ian McQuillan.
No, even before those days.
Oh, really?
Yeah, even before those days.
Before Ian McQuillan, that's a long time ago.
I'm going to dig that out. So everything we've spoken about today, you'll find in the notes. So you can find a link on how you can buy your copy of Relationship Fundraising, how you can get hold of the various donor experience papers.
They can log on to kenburnett.com.
Or go to kenburnett.com.
Will help them. They can order it from their direct link to the publisher.
So we have all of those. But Ken, thank you very much for giving us, as Giles said, an hour of your time. It's been absolutely fabulous. Giles, do you?
If you ask me to say something final, I just want to pick up one of the things you said about what you would say to a donor, and that is, it will be a pleasure for you. Yeah. And I wish everybody watching this would realise that the joy of giving. Giving is good for you.
Giving is great.
It will be a pleasure for you. Why would you deprive a donor of that pleasure? I think I love those words. I'll have them printed above my desk.
Excellent. Thank you.
Fabulous. So that's goodbye from me. I've been Mark Phillips.
I still am Giles Pegram.
I am a failure, but I've come to terms with that. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you. Goodbye.